A pyramid is one of the strongest and sturdiest structures ever built, and I'm going to show you how to reread in your target language to form a foundation as steady and sturdy as that of a pyramid. Now, when I read this book recently, Fluent Forever, I realized that this is something we really have to do when reading in our target language. For reading these wonderful graded readers, for example, we have Latin, Oswald Bera, and we have Thrasymachus. Really, any of them, what they do, they're graded readers, right? They start from the basics and they get more complex. This works really well for learning another language because you learn basic things and you build on a foundation. Now here's something that I've realized that I've needed to emphasize to my students a lot more. Specifically, how essential it is to read the previous chapters again and again. And why is that so essential? Well, as Gabriel Weiner has shown, there is the forgetting curve. The forgetting curve is the result of data collected by Hermann Ebbinghaus, who memorized nonsense words like these nonsense syllables to see how long he could retain them. How long could he retain just half of it? How long would it take to forget about half? Less than an hour. And after a day, he was down to just 30% of what he had remembered the previous day. This is extraordinary. This means that we absolutely have to continue to study. We certainly have to try to engage with our target language every day, but ideally we incorporate some kind of study that happens even throughout the day. When you read one of these excellently crafted, graded readers, what you'll find is that you go from chapter 1 and you understand a lot. Often there are check-on learning questions in the middle or at the end of the chapters. And once you get through that, you realize, okay, yeah, I know what's going on. I can go on to the next chapter. You go on to chapter 2 and you keep going and going. Eventually you'll get to a point where you're like, wait, what? You get confused, especially if you might have had a day off or 2 days off or several days off. This has happened to all of us when we try to learn foreign languages, especially with a reading method, right? Then what you have to do, you have to reread the chapters. And I find with my own students, they get to a point in a chapter of, say, Thrasymachus Catabasis, where they feel pretty confused about something that, in fact, they had read and probably understood in context chapters before, but they just happen to forget it. This happens to all of us. As we saw in the learning curve, we can only retain 50% in an hour. So it's expected that we're going to forget. So we need to repeat and ingrain the things that we are trying to learn in order to statistically give ourselves a chance to build a stronger foundation. So how do we build this pyramid? Yes, we have to reread the chapters, but do I just read it once again, or what do I do? This is what will absolutely work, and I have done this. I've done this with Oswald Bera, and it works extremely well, and that is to do the following. First, you read chapter 1. You understood it? You feel like you're ready to go on to chapter 2? I'm telling you, don't. Go back to the beginning of chapter 1 and read it all the way through. This time it will be much easier. You will know the vocabulary much better. You will understand new things about the grammar, and you'll start to notice, oh, I didn't notice that before. And you'll start to even learn more things. You will be even better prepared to go on to chapter 2. Then you read chapter 2, and that ends up being a good experience for you. You learn new things. Eventually you get to the end. Should you go into chapter 3? No, go back to chapter 1. Reread chapter 1 all the way through, and now this is starting to get pretty easy. You're starting to get a real extensive reading experience where you're able to read more and more fluently. This builds confidence. And it also allows you to notice new things that you might not have seen before. New kinds of maybe grammatical constructions or endings. Different things about the vocabulary, subtleties that maybe weren't apparent before. You're still following the story, but even better. But the little subtleties that you think are really just tiny little things, the authors who wrote these kinds of graded readers were probably inserting numerous subtleties that they were expecting you to kind of remember when you got to chapter 5, 6, and 10. They weren't absolutely critical at the time, so you probably didn't retain them, but that's why the rereading is so effective. So you reread chapter 1, you reread chapter 2, you're noticing new things, you're becoming more fluent as a reader, you're gaining confidence, then you go into chapter 3. And then finishing chapter 3, reread 1, 2, 3, before going on to 4, and so on, and so on, and so on, and thus you build your rereading pyramid. A strong foundation in your own mind, in your own memory of the vocabulary, elements of the grammar, the syntax. New vocabulary becomes so much easier to learn because you're not struggling to hang on to the words that you just learned in the previous chapter or in chapter 2 or chapter 1 because you've been rereading them so many times. Well, how many times are you going to be rereading these things? Let's take Oswald Bera. It has 28 chapters, so by the time you get to chapter 28, you will have read chapter 1 about 28 times at least, right? And chapter 2, 27, chapter 3, 26, etc. That many times, and which is fantastic because those early chapters have so much core vocabulary, so many important grammatical elements, basic things that you absolutely have to master to move on. It works really, really effectively. And with Thrasymachus, there are 32 chapters, so by the time you get to chapter 32, you should have read chapter 1 about 31 times, right? That is a really effective way to prepare yourself for every chapter and to truly master the more important basics while you build on top of that. Now, I can imagine you're thinking, wouldn't it get kind of boring to read chapter 1 20 or 30 times? I'm going to tell you about some strategies to make it more stimulating and make it more interesting. But something else that occurs to me, and something that is mentioned too in Fluent Forever, is how important it is, the concept of spaced repetition. And that's something that this video's sponsor, LingoPie, does so well with its interface, because when you watch movies or TV shows in your target foreign language, anytime there's a new word that you want to remember, you can just click on it right there in the subtitles. It's amazing. And then it will create a flashcard for you. And the flashcards are going to be given to you in something called spaced repetition. That is, they'll be given to you at the perfect time, just before you're going to forget, and that is the ideal time to review something because that allows you to remember it better. You form an even stronger neural connection than if it's super easy. That's what spaced repetition is all about. You haven't forgotten yet, but it's just a teensy little bit of a struggle, and so it's actually kind of fun. In fact, there are fun games that are integrated into this interface that LingoPie has so that all of the things you want to learn, you'll be able to learn very rapidly. And in fact, while this is a rereading technique that I'm telling you about today, you could even use it with LingoPie as a rewatching technique.
Δίας πως συνήθως δεν μπορούσε να συγκρατηθεί.
If you find a series that you absolutely love, before watching episode 2 of the series, go back and watch episode 1 again. And there are different ways you can do that. Maybe you're ready to turn off the English subtitles. Just use the foreign language subtitles and try to remember that new vocabulary that you just learned. Try to remember it in context. Follow the story. You can always turn on the English subtitles at any time in order to remind yourself or consult your flashcards that you've been making.
Από τα έργα των προγόνων τους.
Then go on to episode 2. You watch episode 2, go back and watch episode 1 again, and so on and so forth. So you can find these ways to make older episodes more interesting by giving yourself more of a challenge. Eventually, you'll know every word. You'll start to memorize the dialogue in these shows, which gives you enormous vocabulary in context, in the context of situations and story. And that's one of the best ways to learn a language. And that's, in fact, why these graded readers can be so effective, because you have a story that's actually interesting, that's pulling you through from chapter to chapter. You want to know what's going to happen next. But I'm telling you, slow down and go back and reread those earlier chapters. Luke, you tell me, oh Luke, yeah, it's kind of boring to reread the earlier chapters. You told me how to make the rewatching of episodes again and again interesting. What about chapters? Well, there's different ways you can do it. I have this one video, the 7-step reading method, that you can check out, ways that you can reread reading aloud in order to make it more interesting. Maybe instead of reading silently, which you really should do very seldom when you're learning another language, read aloud, and read aloud in different ways. Read it with emotion, act it out, play the characters, make funny voices, make the bear voice, make the mouse voice. You do those things and you make the characters come alive for you who is learning the language. You are starting to see more vivid color and details. And as you go along, what else can you do? Say you're rereading chapter 1 again of Thrasymachus Catabasis or Oswald Bera or what have you, and you get to something that you know what it is, you know it really well, maybe you've nearly memorized it. Well, challenge yourself. Ask yourself a question. There are questions sometimes at the end of the chapters or embedded into the text. maybe you can think of a better question. Maybe you can think of a more interesting way to ask about something that just happened in the text, or even introduce different tenses. Maybe the first chapter only uses the present tense, but maybe you're more advanced now. You're past chapter 6, you know how to use the past tense. Maybe you can ask when you reread chapter 1, Tia poiesin o Hermes, hakonis oikian trasumaku. And you can ask yourself that question and then respond to your own question. That way you make things interesting every time you go through. At a bare minimum, when you're rereading, maybe you'll get to the point that the fluency is so there, you don't see anything new anymore. And if you have it printed out too, of course, mark things down, mark like, oh, this is mysterious, I don't understand what this means or that means. And then you're like, oh no, I understand this now, because you figured it out through having read other chapters ahead of this. You understand what that means now, especially through the rereading. And then you get past, there's maybe no mysteries left, and then at least skim it. What you're doing is you're creating excellent reading techniques that will make you a fluent reader. So absolutely try this. I just finished some great classes, so if you're one of my students, go ahead and try to reread the chapters. Try to do this exact thing. Even if you've already read a bunch of the chapters, this is a great way to reread them, especially if you're coming on to the next course. That way you get a chance to reread the really important early stuff again and again, which makes the later stuff that much easier. But what if you're more advanced in your target language? What if you can already read some of the original literature? Maybe it's books of the Aeneid or the Iliad or the Odyssey. Maybe you're reading the novels, the ancient language novels, or you're reading Sartre, I don't know, something. You're reading whatever it is that you love to read in your target language, but you're still, you're learning and you want to be better at it. Do the same thing. Take my favorite novel in ancient Greek, favorite so far, which is An Ephesian Tale. It's divided in these little segments, which are like tiny little chapters, little kepalaias, what we call them. When you finish one, go back and read it. When you finish 2, go back, read 1 and 2. When you finish 3, read 1 and 2 and 3. And even though novels like that were meant to be read by native speakers, they're not graded readers, this still will work, because in something like An Ephesian Tale, there's specific vocabulary about love and pirates and crucifixion and being buried alive, all of these kinds of things you need the vocabulary for. And fortunately, since the author is talking about broadly the same subject matter in the whole text, you get to repeat those key things in the same context that you already understood the first time you went through any given chapter. You get to repeat those key terms and vocabulary and every aspect of the language, even if it's on the simpler side but you still didn't have a good grasp of before, you will master rapidly. And then when you get to those follow-on chapters, you get to later chapters, you won't be looking at the dictionary anymore. You won't be trying to hunt for words. Grammatical forms that you once thought were impossible to understand are now immediately clear to you. So try this pyramid rereading technique. Let me know if it works for you. It'll take you, a few days, maybe weeks to try it out, but I do want to hear from you. Please leave a comment below. And also, thanks again to LingoPie. Check them out. Links in the description. And we'll see you next time. Wesyahal and walete and eroste.